beginning, I wanted a Norton motorcycle, and I was
No, wait a minute. Excuse me. Weren't you turning what?
50
years old,
and
so
I wanted a Norton, and at that point in time, you couldn't actually purchase one right then and there. And my wife said, "Why don't you just build your own Norton?" And I'd always wanted a cafe racer, and with the cafe racer, you start off with a Norton featherbed frame, and usually you put some other sort of motor in it. Has to do the ton, has to go over 100 miles an hour. So I started looking around, and one of the Nortons that they made at one time was a Norton Electra. So I started thinking maybe you could put an electric motor in a Norton featherbed. And shortly after I did that, we heard about your race. It was an exhibition in Mid-Ohio. And so that sort of gave me a reason to get it ready and to finish it up and to get it on a track and see what it would really do.
Well, it was. I think it was an email to Mark Tuttle from Rider Magazine that he forwarded to me and said, "Thad, I don't know about this guy, and you know, do what you want with this email." I said, "You know, this sounds kind of interesting. I'm going to just look into it a little further." And so Brian called me back, and that's how the relationship with us began. I said, "Sure, I'll ride the bike. You pay for a plane ticket to Mid-Ohio." And he says, "Look, I'll bring in a sleeping bag and a tent," which ended up to be a little small that first year. We've sized up to a larger tent.
We're a two-man tent now.
we're privateers though, and so anyway, that's the way the relationship began.
It was love at first sight?
You want to field that question?
Actually, with everything that's happened with TTXGP and racing the bike and building the bike, I'd say the most important part is Thad's friendship of everything. It's just been really, really wonderful. Well, after 2009, we ran the dustbin fairing that Norton had used back in 1954. And then we built a new bike for 2010. And we went with the fairing and bodywork that Peter Williams had raced successfully, and on the John Player Special. And actually, because of this, I got to become sort of pen pals with Peter for a while, and he was always one of my heroes growing up. So that was nice. And we found out at the first race that bodywork that Peter Williams had designed in the wind tunnel was quite efficient, very aerodynamic, and we were hitting some pretty high speeds on that bike, up around 120 miles an hour. And so I think we did really well in 2010. We hadn't even tried the bike before we brought it from Virginia to California.
Yeah, testing started Friday morning of the race. Truthfully.
Yeah. We were the first team to ever race an electric bike against gasoline bikes in a sanctioned race, Barber Motor Speedway, in October 2010. They started us dead last in the grid.
350 GP.
And despite that, starting dead last in the grid, by the time the first lap was over, Thad was up to 7th. Second lap, he was up to 3rd. Then he was in 2nd. Then he was a closer 2nd. White flag lap, he was leading the race, and on the last lap, there wasn't a gas bike in sight. The announcer kept talking about how the electric bike was going to fade, you were going to see this, and you're going to see that. And they had a record crowd at Barber. It was like 60 or 70,000 people. And they were very excited about what they were seeing. And
as a matter of fact, George Barber's was too, as a matter of fact. I talked to him just a couple weeks ago, and I reintroduced myself, and I said, "Remember, I'm the guy that rode the electric bike against the gasoline bike and made history at your racetrack, George." And he really liked the sound of that.
In 2011, we started from scratch, except we kept the battery pack. And with our team, it's always we've always tried to do as much as we could with a somewhat limited budget. I mean, we've been really grateful.
Somewhat limited.
Yeah, somewhat limited, but then again, I mean, we've had help from Icework Corporation, we've had help from Markel Insurance Corporation, and from CPL Systems. So we've had some wonderful sponsorship and support, but it's not a business for us. And so, yes, our budget's limited. Our total budget would probably, for the motorcycle, would probably buy you a touring motorcycle.
This bike was built from scratch, like Brian said. We've got the same batteries. But frame crafters out of Chicago built a new, it's a new interpretation of the same Norton featherbed frame, and we kind of repackaged the bike with some different components, better brakes, forks, wheels, etc., to accept the more horsepower that we got.
And I think a lot of people would scratch their heads and wonder, why are we running a 1951 chassis with this technology and trying to keep up with these very technically advanced bikes that TTXGP has brought to the grid, technically advanced not only in the electrical systems but also in the chassis design. I mean, we're seeing new things that we haven't seen in any other area of motorcycling in some of these chassis designs. But I guess that's our history for our little team, and we're sticking with that. And I think for a lot of older people, I mean, Thad and I are both 52 years old, and I think for a lot of older motorcyclists, they look at this bike and they see something that they recognize, and they're much more likely then to take the next step and ask a question and maybe consider embracing this technology. Anybody that's a true motorcyclist tends to have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 bikes, because no motorcycle does everything well. So on a given morning, when I would like to take a Sunday morning drive and not only feel the cool breeze and have the visibility and everything else on a motorcycle that people relate to, they keep saying freedom. Now you can even hear the birds in the trees. So there's a time and a place for an electric motorcycle, and that doesn't mean that I'm going to trade my real Norton Commando or get rid of it. But I'd like to ride one of these bikes on the street. We're going to license it, and I'm going to start riding it on the street.
For me, that's kind of sort of the thrill of what we're doing, is wondering where this is going to all take us.
I think the right thing for us to be doing right now is to be building these machines, building the best machine we can build, taking them to racetracks, breaking them, catching them on fire, crashing them, all these things, so that they'll be really good quality machines for the public to buy someday. And that someday's not far off. We crashed our bike this year. It wasn't Thad's fault. I crashed it, I suppose.
No,
the encoder came loose and it locked the motor. So we know now that you can take lithium polymer batteries and tumble a bike at high rates of speed and put some duct tape on it, take it back out the same weekend, the next day, and take second place in a race. So they're not very fragile.